George Galloway for كلمة on الميادين television, coming to you from London. Coming to you from London. I'm George Galloway, presenting كلمة where every word is free. Welcome to كلمة on Al-Mayadeen television with me, George Galloway, coming to you from London with an audience of experts and educated amateurs like me. Tonight we're discussing Al-Qaeda, friend or foe? You might think that's a pretty strange question. At least at one time it would have been. After all, Al-Qaeda were the people who brought down the Twin Towers in New York. At least that's the official story, killing thousands of Americans. It was because of the presence of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan that Britain and the United States and others invaded and occupied Afghanistan at the cost of possibly hundreds of thousands of lives and trillions of dollars in treasure. Public enemy number one then, surely Al-Qaeda. Well, not quite, and I'll come to that in a moment. The danger of Iraq giving weapons of mass destruction to Al-Qaeda was given as one of the principal reasons for the invasion and occupation of Iraq, which has killed well over 1 million people, many of them British and American service personnel, and again, costing trillions of dollars. Public enemy number one then, surely? Well, not quite. And to understand the answer to that conundrum, you have to go back a little to the 1980s, when Britain, under Margaret Thatcher, and the United States, under President Ronald Reagan, actually invented what became Al-Qaeda. They invented them, they armed them, they financed them, though working through Persian Gulf satrapies in order to do so, and Egypt and Turkey for that matter. And above all, they extolled them in their media and propaganda machine. They told us that those who were fighting the then government, Soviet-backed government in Afghanistan, were freedom fighters. And freedom fighters for whom every extra mile must be gone. This was evident on the platform of the British Conservative Party when Mrs. Thatcher brought those who became Al-Qaeda actually onto the platform in order to take a bow and receive their applause. Indeed, I personally told Mrs. Thatcher to her face in Parliament, "You have opened the gates to the barbarians, and a long dark night will now descend upon the people of Afghanistan." That's what I told her just the day before those pirates, those brigands, took control of Kabul. And then came the 90s. Al-Qaeda, the monster that Dr. Frankenstein had created in Afghanistan in the 1980s, broke free, as monsters tend to do. I asked David Cameron once if he'd read the novel by Mary Shelley called Frankenstein, and if he had he read it all the way to the end? Because if he had, he would know that the reason a monster is called a monster is that once it's fully grown at your hand, then you no longer control it. And so in Dar es Salaam, and in Kenya, the Al-Qaeda gangs wreaked havoc, killing hundreds, almost all of them poor Africans, in bomb atrocities outside the US Embassy in those countries. And then they attacked the USS Cole off the Yemen in a suicide operation that killed a large number of American service personnel. Then they attacked Al-Khobar in Saudi Arabia, again killing many Westerners, as well as many others. But of course, they saved the best from their point of view to the 9/11 atrocity, mass murder, which killed thousands of US and other citizens on 9/11, 2001. Then our former friends became our firm enemies. We invaded and occupied Afghanistan, invaded and occupied Iraq. We killed millions, we lost thousands, and we cost ourselves trillions, many trillions of dollars in treasure. Well, in fact, Al-Qaeda is now our friend. Britain's friend, the United States' friend. And again, we're giving them guns and money and softening people up for the next stage of the propaganda offensive. It's not likely that they'll end up on the platforms at the Republican Party and the Conservative Party conferences, but be sure the ground is being prepared for a new propaganda offensive to tell us that Al-Qaeda are now the moderates and they should be supported to the nth degree. We'll hear what my audience have to say about that right after this. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al-Miadin television, coming to you from London. We're asking the question, Al-Qaeda, friend or foe? I outlined in my introduction how they were first our friends, then our foes, and now they are our friends again. Even though that in Syria and in Iraq, they are jointly culpable for atrocities on an unimaginable scale. Crucifying people, beheading people, eating people's hearts. I'm not making that last bit up. I don't know if the video is any longer available, but they actually cut open people's chests and ate their hearts. They have destroyed the religious places of worship of anyone who doesn't agree with them, whether they are Muslim or Christian. They have massacred high-level Christian clerics. They have taken nuns and other religious people as hostages, and they run the risk of coming to power in a Mediterranean capital, Damascus. A real danger, that one. Yet the West is ready to help them. They formed a new front, which is called the Fatah Front, imagine, and that front, we're told, are the moderates, who are going to fight ISIS on the one hand and fight the regime of Bashar al-Assad on the other. It is an intoxicating mixture. I wonder if the people making these decisions are actually drunk or mad or just bad, or maybe all three. Let's hear from our audience.
Assalamu alaikum, George. My name's Tamina. I'm a psychologist. My question
is... We need you. A psychologist is what we need to look into this matter.
I hope I do that. My question is, do you see any similarities between Al-Qaeda and ISIS? It seems a few years ago, every fighter who is currently fighting for ISIS would have been a recruit of Al-Qaeda. What are the differences and what are the similarities?
Well, actually, I make no distinction between Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Al-Qaeda was the parent of ISIS. Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Jabhat al-Nusra, the Al-Qaeda outfit in Syria, were the mother and father of what is now called ISIS. It's true that Ayman al-Zawahri, the successor to Osama bin Laden, expelled ISIS because they were too extreme, too sectarian, even for Al-Qaeda. But that just means they are a particularly virulent, foul part of the Al-Qaeda mindset. In any case, the conduct of the Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria is exactly the same as the conduct of ISIS. But ISIS has got a slicker public relations front. They've got people who can shoot hideous, gruesome, disgusting, revolting, sickening snuff videos better than Al-Qaeda can. The Al-Qaeda people seem rather technologically backward compared to ISIS. But their method and how they would rule is exactly the same. And what will happen, in my estimation, is exactly what happened with the so-called free, so-called Syrian, so-called army. We gave the so-called Free Syrian Army a mountain of weapons, a mountain of money, and Al-Qaeda and ISIS just took it off them. It's impossible to believe that the Western powers did not know that this was going to happen. So one must assume that they are quite happy that it happened. I mean, literally, the FSA put all their weapons in a warehouse, and Al-Qaeda and ISIS came along and said, give us these weapons or we'll murder you. And so they gave them the weapons. The same is true with the money. So supporting any of these takfiri, fanatic extremists is going to lead to the same result. Now, as a psychologist, I want to ask you, what's in their minds? How can it be in the interests of anybody, including themselves, if the self-appointed caliph, al-Baghdadi, is in power in Damascus, on the Mediterranean, next door to what they call Israel? What kind of recipe is that? Now, unless they are confident that they have ISIS and Al-Qaeda in their back pocket, and that Al-Qaeda and ISIS will never do anything against them, it's impossible for me to fathom what they are up to. Apart from anything else, they thought Al-Qaeda and the Taliban were in their pocket in the 1980s in Afghanistan. And look what happened. Can you shed any light, as a psychologist, on what might be in their minds?
Nothing as such. They're clearly brainwashed, firstly. And I think we're just going to see, as you said, history repeat itself. We know exactly where this is headed. Unfortunately, they're with the wrong people at the wrong time. And we've got, obviously, institutions who are recruiting from all over the world, including the United Kingdom, to go and aid this operation of theirs.
Yeah, we know where this is all beheaded.
Yeah.
I spoke to someone on another program recently who said that why should the Iranians be in Syria? I said to the caller, I'll tell you what, let's have the withdrawal of all foreign forces from the entire region. Let's have the Iranians out of Syria. Let's have the 100,000 foreign fighters that are fighting for Al-Qaeda and ISIS out of Syria. Let's have Israel out of Lebanon, out of the Golan Heights. Let's have the Americans out of Qatar, the Americans out of Saudi Arabia. Let's have every foreign fighter out of every foreign country in the region. That seems to me a legitimate demand, but of course those who level that demand don't mean that at all. They mean that the freedom fighters of Hezbollah and those seeking to protect the Shiite religious places in Syria from Iran, they should be withdrawn. Whilst every Chechen, every Libyan, every Mongolian, every Tom, Dick or Harry from any part of the world should be allowed to overwhelm and destroy Syria. Well, what kind of policy is that? But my point is, we know how ISIS and Al-Qaeda are ruling the parts of Iraq and Syria that they currently rule. They cut people's heads off for chewing gum outside a mosque. They destroy churches, destroy mosques, destroy tombs, kick around the bones from the tombs. Even a companion of the Prophet, a man who had kissed the face of the Prophet, had his head and bones kicked around by these oh so pious Muslims of Al-Qaeda / ISIS. We know what they do. We've seen it because they put it out on a slick video for us to see it, setting fire to people whilst they are alive, crucifying people, chopping off their hands and their feet before then murdering them, murdering foreign journalists, murdering foreign aid workers. That's what they're doing in the land that they control now. What would it be like if they controlled Syria? What would it be like for the Syrians? And what would it be like for everybody else? Yes, sir, go ahead.
First of all, I don't say that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are one group. They all come under the Ibn Taymiyyah or Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. They are 1,000 years old. They have not been created today. This is an ideology. This is a theory. This is a philosophy. Not has been created yesterday or 2 years ago. It's over 1,000 years. Now, there is a difference between Al-Qaeda and ISIS. There are a difference between Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda. There are much difference between those children of the Salafist, I would call them, not Al-Qaeda. Now, if we just said Al-Qaeda in general, Al-Qaeda is a part of the Salafists, and it is not the main group or the main power or the main theory for those. Otherwise, we would have also include the Ikhwan, where the brothers whom they rule Egypt and they try to rule Algeria. In fact, the whole time that Al-Qaeda was ruling Afghanistan, we've never heard that they have bombed a mosque. Yes, they have destroyed a sanam for the Buddhist. Yeah, but never they have destroyed a mosque. And ISIS are destroying every day a mosque. There's much different in their what they are exercising on the ground. So if we also put all those groups under Al-Qaeda, and then we call them enemies. Enemies for whom? Enemies for a public enemy, as far as you explain it. If they are a public enemy, that means they are enemies for their people, for the people whom they live with among them. And in fact, the people whom Al-Qaeda lives among them in Afghanistan had welcomed Al-Qaeda instead. And if you are an enemy, you will not be welcomed that much. That's why Al-Qaeda remain and still remain, because they have been welcomed by their local people. So I would clearly say Al-Qaeda is different than ISIS. ISIS is totally different than Al-Qaeda, and they are not. ISIS is a children of Al-Qaeda. Yes, there was a benefit for Al-Qaeda to announce the relation between them and ISIS, for Al-Qaeda to remain, to continue. And there was a very benefit also for ISIS to announce they are belonging to Al-Qaeda, for them to grow at that time. And that was an instruction came from the creators of ISIS. And I think we all know who create ISIS and who is supporting ISIS at the present, which does not include Al-Qaeda at that time, when USA support Al-Qaeda at the beginning, and then after that they never support them. They were fighting with them. And I don't also believe in one example that you, George, has brought, that when Al-Qaeda has bombed United States, the trade
center.
Yes, and I don't think Al-Qaeda has did that as well. I think that United States people by themselves.
Well, I don't want to be diverted onto that argument. Let's agree that the United States told us that Al-Qaeda did it. And therefore, how is it possible that the United States is now openly, publicly stated by their leaders, is now openly giving weapons and money to Al-Qaeda? How is that possible? 9/11 was only 14 years ago. How is it possible that somebody you told us destroyed the lives of thousands of people, of your countrymen and women, in your greatest city, New York, but now, 14 years later, you are openly stating that you're going to give guns and money to the very same people? Or is it your point that Jabhat al-Nusra, though it states that it is in Al-Qaeda, is somehow not in Al-Qaeda? Is that your point? And what differences then are there between Jabhat al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda? Is there a difference in methodology? Is there a difference in ideology?
What did Al-Qaeda did and what did Jabhat al-Nusra did? Jabhat al-Nusra consider the enemy is their people, is the local people. Al-Qaeda did not. That is the difference.
Yes, but Jabhat al-Nusra publicly claimed that they were giving their loyalty, their pledge of obedience to Ayman al-Zawahri, the head of Al-Qaeda. They said so. And Zawahri answered that he accepted this pledge and that they were now to be considered as Al-Qaeda in Syria. I don't want to dance on the end of a pin with you about terminology. We'll come in the next segment to who you say are the creators of this phenomenon. I agree with you, it didn't start yesterday or 2 years or 4 years ago. This current has existed in the Muslim Ummah for, you say, 1,000 years, certainly for many centuries, and that's not irrelevant to the point that we're discussing tonight. But the main point I'm discussing tonight is Al-Qaeda the West's friend or foe? And if so, why? And I'll come back to that after this. You're watching Kalima Horra on Al-Miadin television with me, George Galloway, coming to you from London. We're discussing the question, Al-Qaeda, friend or foe? Pretty silly question, you might think, but so far it's not turning out that way. So let's hear from the next participant. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, George.
Walaikum salam.
My name's Aqib. My question is, you don't believe in conspiracy theories. How do you see the official account of Osama bin Laden's death in light of Seymour Hersh's article? He's made quite a few refutations of what the Americans have claimed happened that night. How do you see that?
Well, I've worked with Seymour Hersh for a quarter of a century. I was just looking, in fact, today, a joint operation I did with him in 1992 or 91 even. And if Seymour Hersh writes something, it has to be taken very seriously indeed. That doesn't mean he's got everything right, and it doesn't mean that everything he said about the death of bin Laden is right, but it has to be taken very seriously. There are a few more serious, heavyweight journalists in the world, and none in the United States, as he is. It's not that I don't believe in conspiracy theories. It's just that I don't believe in automatically opting for the conspiracy theories. Of course, there are conspiracies, but that doesn't mean everything's a conspiracy. If you're looking for a grassy knoll, a reference to the Kennedy assassination, if you're looking for a grassy knoll in every story, you won't find one, and it's foolish to invent one when you don't find one. I'm sure that the power that bin Laden eventually achieved was substantially assisted by Western governments, by the government of the United States in particular, but many others. I'm sure he was, in that sense, for a long time, an agent of Western power. I don't mean that they gave him a salary. He had no need of a salary. But he was acting in coordination with them in order to destroy the power in Afghanistan at that time, and thus help bring down the Soviet Union. And that was a very, very spectacularly successful operation. I believe that bin Laden was not acting as an American agent when he ordered the attack on the Twin Towers. I believe that he had broken with the United States by then. Unlike my dear friend who spoke earlier, I do believe that people motivated by the Al-Qaeda mindset did bring down the Twin Towers, did murder thousands of entirely innocent people. Just as I believe people operating according to the Al-Qaeda mindset blew up the London Underground and killed 55 Londoners and maimed hundreds of others. Just like I believe that there are perhaps 100,000 foreigners now in Syria motivated by the Al-Qaeda mindset. When history is finally able to be written fully and everything can be seen in plain sight, it's my case that the relationship between the West and Al-Qaeda and ISIS is much more nuanced, much more complicated than we're now told that it is. For this reason and other reasons that will no doubt emerge in the course of this discussion. Please.
You mentioned about the timing of his death. ISIS didn't really come out as a big major force until he was dead. And I think you mentioned before as well that ISIS, in your opinion now, after some evidence that you've seen recently, ISIS is hand in glove with Western powers now in Iraq and in Syria, and you believe that. Do you think that has anything to do with it? Do you think that Osama bin Laden was just, kept as a pawn and kept alive until they needed him, and when they didn't need him anymore, when they had a force like ISIS ready to act on their behalf, they just decided to get rid of him?
Well, that's your theory, and it's a perfectly plausible one. And it may well turn out to be entirely accurate. I don't know the answer. Neither have I seen real evidence of what my current belief is about the relationship between the West and ISIS, other than the evidence of my own eyes and my own brain. Neither would I say that they are necessarily hand in glove, to use your phrase. What is now clear to me is that there is a strategic conflation of the interests of ISIS and of the West, certainly in Syria. And I adduce the following in support of my, you can call it conspiracy theory. First of all, the West is supposedly at war with ISIS, but ISIS get bigger and stronger and have more achievements every day. That doesn't compute. Let's take the capture of Ramadi, for example, or the capture of Palmyra in Syria. Both involved the movement of thousands of fighters. In the case of Ramadi, across a desert. In fact, in both cases across a desert, but especially in Ramadi, involved the movement of thousands of fighters in a long column, not of tanks, like 1991 in the Road of Death in Mutla Ridge, when the United States Army incinerated the army of Iraq in the back as it was leaving Kuwait. They saw the column with much less developed technology than they have now, no drones, as far as I recall, in 1991. But they saw this column and they killed it and everyone in it. So they must have seen the columns advancing on both Ramadi and Palmyra, yet they did not strike either of those columns. Neither, in the case of Iraq, which has a friendly government to them, did they inform even the government in Baghdad of what was about to happen. That's pretty powerful evidence, in my view. But there's other evidence. And I alluded to it earlier. On the face of it, the most savage, the most extreme, the most fanatical Islamist fighters are closing on Damascus and may well come to power next door to what they call Israel. Yet Israel is not only not lifting a finger to stop it, not only not lifting a word in the international arena about it, but is actually assisting these people in their military effort. It's been in the Israeli press many times that they are treating the wounded of this rebellion and invasion, foreign invasion of Syria. They are bombing, this is not contested, they are bombing the Syrian army. They are bombing the resistance that has come to assist the Syrian army. They are assassinating people, leading people who are fighting Al-Qaeda and ISIS. To me, that is insurmountable evidence, because if there wasn't some conspiracy going on, Netanyahu would be at the United Nations now with his diagrams pointing out how close people that bin Laden and Zawahri thought were too extreme to have as members are about or in danger of coming to power in the country next door to them. And he is not. And the fact that he is not tells me that there's a deeper and more complicated game going on. Thanks for the question, a very good one. Who's next? Yes, gentleman in the second row.
I'm Eamon, and I work as a research intern at Integrity UK, which is an independent think tank and research centre in London. Now, my question is, to what extent is Western foreign policy towards radical insurgent groups such as Al-Qaeda the cause of the rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria today? Is it too simple just to blame foreign policy or Western foreign policy towards Al-Qaeda?
Well, it would be too simple to state that boldly as the only cause, for the reasons the honourable gentleman, learned gentleman, adumbrated earlier. We all know, you know, I know, people who think like that. And we've known them for a long time. I was once held hostage in a room by a group of some 20 fanatics from a group then called Al-Muhajirun, which were a spin-off of various other extremist organizations and have subsequently metamorphosed as several further. And they were going to hang me. They locked the door. My daughter then stood in front of me to try to stop them from murdering me, naively imagining that they would not touch a woman. But of course we now know that they're more than happy to do unspeakable things to women. Their religious piety doesn't stop that. So this tendency, this current, has a long track record, long even before Afghanistan in the 1980s, though it crystallized in the 1980s in a political military form. But I have absolutely no doubt at all that if Britain and the United States had not invaded and occupied Iraq, there would be no ISIS. There would be no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. There would be many other problems. There would be much in the way of repression as there had been prior to that invasion. But the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, undoubtedly, as I warned Tony Blair at the time that it would, sent cascading everywhere this particular form of extremism. And I'm absolutely sure about that, because what happened was British foreign policy, American foreign policy, not just towards the invasion and occupation of Iraq, but towards, for example, the Palestinian question, where unlimited support is given to the illegal occupier, and the victims of the illegal occupier are branded as terrorists and criminals, and the Western attitude towards tyrants that still rule the Muslim world, almost without exception, from the Atlantic to the Gulf and many other parts of it too. Thus we sowed, if that's the word, a big swamp, a swamp of hatred and bitterness and alienation about our double standards, about our hypocrisy, and about the blood that we had shed. And out of that swamp came the recruits for ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other similar groups. That's my thesis. What's yours?
I think it is way too simple to just blame foreign policy, although...
I didn't, of course.
Yeah, of course. Although
but you wrote that down when you thought I would.
Well,
Go ahead.
they told
Sorry
me to
interrupt.
yeah. I think the short-termism from foreign policy advocates, especially American foreign policy advocates, since World War II, if you like, you look at the Korean War, then Vietnam, then you had the Mujahideen, and then you move on to Afghanistan and Iraq, early 2000s, and then I would argue Libya and Egypt as well, as of 2011. It seems that all foreign policy is short-term and does not look at long-term effects. And which is why asking is Al-Qaeda a friend or foe today is a big issue, because they might be a friend today, but God knows they will be a foe tomorrow. So this short-termism by Western foreign policy makers is a big issue, I think, with fighting groups such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda before that, and Mujahideen before that. And
well, look, that's such a serious set of points that I'd better wait till after the break to begin to deal with them. I'll be right back. You're watching Kalima Hurra with me, George Galloway, on Al-Miadeen television, coming to you from London. We're discussing Al-Qaeda, friend or foe, and a very interesting discussion is turning out to be too. I'm going to respond to the gentleman who spoke just before the break, but before that, we took our cameras out earlier onto the streets of London to ask London people what they thought. Watch this.
What do you think about Al-Qaeda?
They're not very nice people. They're an unfortunate piece of blowback from, ultimately, I think, American intervention in the Middle East. I mean, we all know the history.
Being somebody who does not like violence, I abhor acts of violence and terrorism and warfare, of course.
An organisation that is looking to promote Islamic values and law throughout, well, I guess throughout the world eventually.
I think all religion is crap.
ماذا برأيك أيهم أخطر؟ داعش القاعدة؟
لا والله العظيم أنا ما شفت القاعدة يعني فيديوهات مريبة، ولكن داعش كان لها صدى شنيع يعني.
Well, right now I would say ISIS.
Probably both. I guess ISIS is most dangerous because it's bigger.
Yes.
Well, that was interesting, as was indeed the questions that were asked by the gentleman in the second row. I restate that I do not say that, that the only reason for this phenomenon is Western foreign policy. The deliberation to ensure that any challenging ideology, challenging to imperial hegemony, would be undermined, subverted, and defeated. I'm thinking in particular of Arab nationalism. If I was widening it to Iran, the undermining and overthrow of Dr. Mossadegh, for example. These were imperial efforts to make sure that no force that could unify people in defense of their own interests and the exclusion of foreign exploiters would be allowed to prosper. It's the immoral principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. Your enemy's enemy isn't always your friend. Sometimes your enemy's enemy is worse than your enemy. And I could give lots of examples in which that's true, and we're discussing several of them now. They didn't like Gaddafi, although I don't quite know why, because he'd rolled over and given them everything that they wanted, including access to Libya's sovereign wealth, which they squandered and stole and lost. He had destroyed his pretty pathetic, actually, weapons of mass destruction program. So I don't quite know why they took the view that they should help to destroy Gaddafi. And insofar as we can see to date, I don't want to revisit an old show, although more than 1 million social media viewers have revisited it. They've managed a stroke of genius to produce a Libya which is even worse than the Libya under the dictator Gaddafi. And there are many, many other cases where your enemy's enemy didn't turn out to be your friend, at least not for very long. But congratulations to your think tank, because you've obviously been doing a lot of thinking. Thank you very much.
Can I just
Yes,
come in on,
of course.
it's interesting you've mentioned Libya, you've also mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. On a slightly different issue, it seems that since the Arab Spring, since 2010, 2011, any Arab country with a democracy or a pseudo-democracy that has developed as of the Arab Spring has then somehow ended up being as a safe haven for terrorist groups. As when you look at Libya today, a third of Libya apparently is under control of ISIS. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, I would argue, is as radical a group as ISIS. And then you look at Iraq, which has become a safe haven to Al-Zarqawi, Al-Qa'ida, and now ISIS. So does that mean that democracy in its current state is not correct for the Arab world?
Well, as Mr. Churchill once opined, democracy is the worst system of government apart from all the others. And I have seen dictatorship up close and personal, and I'm here to tell you that whatever the problems of democracy are, dictatorship is worse. It's worse for everybody concerned, including those that are in the circle and the comprador of the dictator. But that's perhaps another subject. But I must tackle what you have said and what was in part alluded to, or implied rather, earlier. It is not correct to imply that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt are in any way comparable to ISIS or Al-Qaeda. This is wholly wrong. It's wholly wrong for a number of reasons. First of all, it's used to justify the existence of a brutal military dictatorship in Egypt that has killed thousands of people, incarcerated tens of thousands of people, and whose dungeons are full of people being tortured and empty now of the dictator Mubarak and his crooked sons. To conflate ISIS, Al-Qaeda, with the Muslim Brotherhood, if you don't mind my saying so, reveals an agenda. And that agenda suits certain interests, but doesn't stand up to a moment's examination. That's why David Cameron's long inquiry into the Muslim Brotherhood has not published its report. It cannot publish its report because it found nothing at all exceptionable. And it doesn't want to reveal that because the report was effectively commissioned by the dictatorship in Saudi Arabia and other dictatorships in the region. And it will embarrass them if the British government has to publish a report which says we have investigated the Muslim Brotherhood and found that they're not guilty of terrorism or extremism of any kind. Now, who else would like to talk? I'll come back to you. I can't.
Hi, my name is Ali Hussein, and I'm a student. And my question is regarding the emergence of foreign fighters in Syria and Iraq. Some analysts and some people, general people, claim that the Gulf states and even Turkey somehow support these foreign fighters and these groups such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra. And so my question is, if they've been supporting them since the beginning of the emergence in Syria and Iraq, doesn't that mean that they've always been a friend of the West, since these Gulf states and even Turkey are a friend of the West? So they're not being a foe, they've always been a friend of the West, indirectly or directly.
Well, look, there are some of these countries who undeniably have been involved in helping this ISIS, Al-Qaeda phenomenon become so powerful as to threaten the existence of the regime in Damascus. Turkey is the best example because it's the most transparent. We can see it with our own eyes. The Turkish government could not make a serious defense against the charge that they have opened a 500-mile border with Syria to anyone who wants to cross it, including growing numbers of women and children from this country, without guardians and without any examination whatsoever of their intentions. They have allowed their border to be used not only for huge numbers of foreign fighters to go in, but to go in and come out and go in and come out, to go to Istanbul for rest and recreation. I've been in hotels in Istanbul which is filled with people, a babel of accents coming from young men that very much look like fighters to me. It's also been the 500-mile border across which oil stolen from Syria has been transported and sold. Ancient artifacts, historical treasures have been transported out of Syria and out of Iraq, actually, across the same border, in order to be sold to help to fund the insurgency being mounted by these organizations. I haven't seen any evidence that the Saudi government has transferred money to ISIS, not least because nobody can see anything that the Saudi regime does, because it's watertight dictatorship. But it's clear and open now that Saudi Arabia is giving guns and money and other assistance to this new front, which includes Al-Qaeda, and which is notionally, supposedly, going to fight ISIS as well as the regime. And if you believe that, you'll believe anything. In my view, they've openly said that they're doing it. They have been covertly doing it for a long time, but now they are open that they are doing it. And there are other satrapies, lesser satrapies in the region who have been doing the same for a long time and are now openly doing it. Turkey is a member of NATO. Therefore, it can be safely assumed that there are very severe limits to the Turkish government's freedom of movement. If the United States had seriously opposed Turkey's role in this, they could have stopped it and would have stopped it. The Vice President, Joe Biden, unwisely, he's never been allowed out since, at a speech at Harvard, openly stated it, that Turkey and others had gone too far in their support for this insurgency and had inadvertently or advertently helped these most extreme organizations become so powerful that they now threaten to overwhelm Syria and destroy it in the way that Iraq has already been destroyed, torn into pieces, probably never to be put back together again. Who else would like to contribute? Yes, sir.
My name is Mehdi. I am a student and hopefully I'll be studying for the rest of my life.
We're all studying for the rest of our life.
Regardless of education or not. I would like to bring it back to something you mentioned earlier about the names ISIS, Al-Qaeda and so on. So in much of Western mainstream media, we've seen the name Islamic State and so on. I just out of curiosity wonder if you think that this is purposefully used, and I also would like to know your opinion on what the alternative using Daesh would be as a good idea, because it's considered a derogatory term. And there's been a small movement recently trying to reframe ISIS as Daesh to kind of enforce this derogatory term for the group.
Well, first, I don't understand why it is a derogatory term. It is merely an acronym of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. And that's what they called themselves, ISIL. And the Arabic acronym for that is Daesh. So I don't know why it's derogatory. And perhaps, given this is an Arabic television station and this program will be dubbed into Arabic, perhaps I should refer to them as Daesh from now on. But I do think that the use of the term by the Western media of Islamic State is highly dubious and highly suspicious. They would not do it in any other context that I'm aware of. If the Irish Republican Army had declared themselves in the bogside of Londonderry or in West Belfast, the Irish Republic, the British news would never so describe them. They would reject out of hand something which is clearly not true, not the case. And the so-called caliphate of IS, Islamic State, is neither Islamic nor a state. And so why are you describing it as such? As Professor Noam Chomsky has spent a lifetime showing us, words are really important. And the words that you use tell you a lot about where you're coming from and what your agenda is. So I never refer to them as Islamic State because I don't consider them to be Islamic and I don't consider what they hold to be a state. So let me call them Daesh from now on. I'll be right back.
Do you think our government here is still committed to defeating Al-Qaeda or ISIS?
I doubt it. I think that their main commitment is to maintaining their own power and that they will do whatever looks like a popular move for that.
Difficult to say. We don't really know what they're doing behind the scenes. I think they're doing probably as much as they can. Yes, I would say so.
What about America?
I think America's trying to a lot. Apparently they got one of the higher up leaders in Al-Qaeda recently, I believe, taken down, but I don't know. It's tough to take down the whole organization or do anything about
it. Do you think the Western governments are supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria?
I don't think so. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know. I don't know enough about it.
No, of course not.
I don't know enough about that topic to comment on it.
Thank you very much.
You're watching Kalima Horra, where every word is free, on Al-Miadeen television with me, George Galloway, in London. We're just discussing Daesh, friend or foe. I'm now calling it Daesh. You will have noticed. Now, we've not got much time left, and I want to get as many of you in as possible. Who would like the microphone next? Yes, the gentleman at the front.
Hi, George. So my name is Amir, and I'm a director of the immigration company. So my question is just so simple, question is that about why? Because, all of us, we know that, the Daesh and Al-Qaeda just supported with US and UK. I'm not just speaking about the UK, I say US because I'm living in this country. So why in public, the government, they say publicly without any, hesitation that we are, the Daesh is like a toxic, like, the enemy, like, the poison for all the wars, send some troops for them to just let them down and just destroy all of them. But at the behind, so they just support them, assist them, and or they know that, we are stupid or the people are stupid, and they're all aware that, all the people in here, not just in here, in all the world, they're aware that, they just supported by, the big and the most two powerful countries, like, for example, US or UK, or, some big countries. So why they do something like this in the public?
Well, to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, they count on the fact that you can fool enough of the people, enough of the time, in order to carry out a policy which is not only wrong, but utterly self-defeating in my view. I once was caught in a lift with William Hague, trapped in a lift, It's the worst decision he ever made, was to get into that lift with me. And I told him, William, all the decades I've known you, you've been wrong. You've been wrong about everything. But you've never been insane before. But the policy that you are following in Syria is actually insane. If it succeeds, it will put the most extreme fanatics the world has known, perhaps for a millennium, in power in a Mediterranean country. And what do you imagine the result of that will be? And even if it isn't successful, the people that have gone there under the cover of your support for these extremists will one day come back here and they'll be looking to eat our hearts and cut off our heads. At which point the lift doors open and he bolted. So I never got an answer. Because answer, could there be? None. It is undeniably true that indeed this very week, David Cameron blamed the British Muslims. He blamed them openly for the fact that hundreds, it's not thousands, hundreds of British youngsters had gone there to join ISIS. But this argument failed the week before in the High Court when, as the prisoner was about to go up into the dock, the Crown Prosecution Service abandoned the case. Why? Because his defense was, yes, I was fighting in Syria for an organization that is seeking to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. But the British government was also supporting that organization. So how can you put me on trial for, as an individual, doing something that you as a government were doing? The government couldn't allow such a case to go to court. And no doubt that will be the defense of any subsequent extremist who goes before the British courts. So look out for more cases being abandoned. Anyone else want to contribute? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, George. My name is Asad. I'm a secondary school teacher. I'm just coming back to the point about foreign policy. If you remember, if you go back to 2001, when the whole 9/11 happened, and you had Osama bin Laden come out and say, oh, it's because the Americans are in the Holy Land, Saudi Arabia, that's why we attacked them. So it does go back to foreign policy. If you go back to the core of it, all those years ago, it was foreign policy. And obviously 100,000 things have happened over the time, and millions of people have died and everything's happened. But the core of it has always been foreign policy. The core of it has always been Palestine.
Well,
if you go
was
further
once
back.
in a truck stop on the Iraqi-Jordanian border when bin Laden was speaking on the television. It must have been after 9/11 and before the war, so around 2002. And he said three things, sitting in a cave with his Kalashnikov behind him. He said, how can your children be safe and happy when the children of Palestine are being murdered? How can you be safe when the Arabs are not safe from occupation and aggression at the hands of their dictators or of occupation? He contextualized his entire struggle in foreign policy. And up to a point, that had a very big pull. Certainly in the truck stop that I was in, it had a very big pull indeed. People were crying, watching him, I'm sorry to say. A tendency, a current within Islam that is takfiri in nature, which arrogates to itself the right to make takfir against others. That you are, not you, you are a kuffar, you are a heretic, you are an apostate, and I'm going to kill you. This tendency definitely pre-exists any Western foreign policy. It's just that this tendency, this current, has become much bigger and much more powerful as a result of foreign policy. Quick response.
Well, absolutely. Those people always existed from the time of Prophet ﷺ, and there's hadith on that as well, that they will exist right to the end of time. But obviously, these people get exploited for big countries to further their foreign policy. So I'm saying, like, we had the same problem in.
Of course, I don't disagree with that. Let's bring in the think tank representative. What was the name of the think tank?
Integrity UK.
I'm automatically suspicious. I must Google it right away. Go ahead, sir.
Please do. I'd just like to bring it back to your our differing opinions on the Muslim Brotherhood. I just think that the victims, the Christian Coptics, who were victims in the 12 months of Morsi's rule, and the other
what kind of victims? What did Morsi do to the
Muslim Brotherhood supporters, Muslim Brotherhood members would go and attack Christian Coptics.
That's ridiculous. Why would Morsi want that?
Muslim Brotherhood members and Muslim Brotherhood supporters, which is why my issue is with the Muslim Brotherhood. Another example is Sheikh Hassan Shahate, who was brutally...
Not by Muslim Brotherhood.
Oh, no.
This is from the Al-Qaeda mentality, not from the Muslim Brotherhood.
The attackers and a journalist went the year after to find out exactly what happened to Sheikh Hassan Shahate, and until then, no one would talk to him. Now, the attackers were Muslim, weren't Al-Qaeda, were Muslim Brotherhood members, were Muslim Brotherhood supporters.
No, that's simply not true. I saw what happened to the late Sheikh, and it was an atrocity, a murder, carried out by real extremists. And by anybody's definition, what happened there, and any attacks on any Christian religious places, was against the interests of Morsi. How could that possibly advance the cause of Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood to have such a thing happen? I mean, you have to apply the old Latin question, cui bono? Who benefits? Who benefited from these examples that you gave? Certainly not Morsi. Certainly not the Muslim Brotherhood. We need to press on. The gentleman at the front who made an excellent opening contribution. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. As far as I understand, Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, ISIL, Al-Nusra are all extremists, all fundamentalists, all of them considered Salafist. That's what I understand. But at this part itself, why would Europeans and America support the part of them in one place and fight them in another place, if this is the case?
Well, that's exactly my point. And it's a point I raised on the floor of the House of Commons to David Cameron 3 years ago. What's the difference between the Al-Qaeda that we're going with France to Mali to kill and the Al-Qaeda that we are assisting in Syria? What's the difference between these two things? I asked him, tell me the main differences, just the main ones. But he had no answer to that. And it's actually back to the point made by the young gentleman from the think tank, that their friends and their foes, according to the place and according to the time. The Muslim Brotherhood is not one thing in all the world. It's not even one thing in any one country. The difference between the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood that supported the FIS uprising in Algeria, where, by the way, now that you look back on it, many of ISIS's tactics were first applied in the modern era. They are two different things. The Muslim Brotherhood in Turkey, Erdogan, is not the same as Baghdadi. He's not seeking an Afghan-type solution for Turkey. To say what you're saying would be to say that there's no difference between me as a socialist in Britain and Pol Pot or Stalin. They were socialists. I'm a socialist. But there's a lot of socialists. There's a big spectrum. And you can't say that because a person believes in something, believes in an ideology, that they are somehow synonymous with the most extreme examples of adherence to that ideology. It's a big mistake to demonize the Muslim Brotherhood, because actually you're doing the job of ISIS and Al-Qaeda for them. Because if Muslims, Sunni Muslims, believe that there is no possibility of political Islam being allowed to win elections and govern and be voted out, that they will be overthrown, murdered, tortured, exiled, then what's that saying to the mass of Sunni Muslims in the world? It's saying either give up your political Islam or go and fight with those who have no interest in democracy, no interest in elections. They're going to come to power through the barrel of a gun. That's a very dangerous mindset. And it's not one which Iran, for example, has fallen for. This, what's being said here is certainly not what Iran says. It's certainly not what Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah says. It's not what Hezbollah says. They say that common cause needs to be made between Sunni and Shia. There's nothing unacceptable about political Islam, neither in its Shia or its Sunni variety. Political Islam has every right to be in the marketplace of ideas and seek to attract support for those ideas. And if they win, you have to give them a chance. Erdogan, until recently, made a spectacular success of Turkey. Spectacular. Economically, culturally, allowing women to wear veils to the universities, removing anti-Islamic prejudice from the rule book. He made every Turk 1.5 times better off in 10 years. And then he destroyed it all by backing the most reactionary fanatics in Syria, and ended up, after a foreign policy which was supposed to be based on no quarrel with the neighbors, to being a quarrel with all the neighbors. And this was a big mistake. Let me squeeze in one more speaker at the back there, please. Yes, madam.
All right. Hi. I just want to say, if we believe democracy is not to give, it's to have it, to earn it, is that better we say to all those people from United Kingdom or US Army or whatever, they go and all the guns and things going to those places, get back and get off of that countries and let them to solve them problems themselves? It's better.
In the end, they have to solve their problems themselves, because the intervention of others merely makes their problems worse. That's why, no matter my detestation of ISIS, I'm wholly opposed to the British or American armed forces going to fight them, because that will make a pre-existing problem even worse than it is at the moment. I believe that the Muslims themselves in Iraq, in Syria, will have to solve their problems amongst themselves, and they're entitled to seek the assistance of their neighbors to solve those problems. But it would be utterly counterproductive to ask the people who produced the chaos in Iraq in the first place to return to the scene of their former crimes and try to resolve them. Nobody would trust their motives. Nobody would believe their intentions to be good or sincere, and they would very quickly be enveloped in an even bigger maw of murder and mayhem than exists there at the moment. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. This is George Galloway for Kalima Hurra on Al-Miadeen Television in London. Thank you.